Okay, morning everyone.
Morning.
Morning. I thought I might start with a little quote from Winston Churchill, bearing in mind that it's budget night tonight, and he had something to say about fiscal policy. This is what he said: "Among our socialist opponents, there is great confusion. Some of them regard private enterprise as a tiger to be shot. Others look at it as a cow they can milk. Only in a handful of cases is that what it really is. The strong and willing horse that pulls the whole cart along." And just a couple of little quotes from different venues, church venues. "The pastor would appreciate it if the ladies of the congregation would lend him their electric girdles for the pancake breakfast next Sunday." And another one, another saying: "Low self-esteem support group will meet Thursday at 7 p.m. Please use the back door." And then finally, "Weight Watchers will meet at 7 p.m. at the First Presbyterian Church. Please use a large double door at the side entrance." Do we have any visitors? I have one visitor I've already met, and we're very pleased to see her, and that's Joanne Carrera.
Hi.
Joanne, welcome. I think Joanne got to us through our wonderful website, which is looked after by Bruce. So, Joanne, we're pleased to see you. Hope you enjoy the meeting, and maybe you might be interested in joining our club. We'd certainly be very pleased to have you. Are there any other guests?
George.
And we've got our guest speaker, George Greenberg. George, good morning.
Good morning, thank you.
Thank you for, of course, being our guest speaker. Di is going to introduce George a little later, and it was great that he could come along early and be here for the meeting as well. I'll call through the roll. It's fairly small type, so I'll have to struggle a bit reading it, but I'll do my best. Rob Adams, Peter Bedford,
Here.
Noel Benton, Bert Barrowman,
Apology for the...
Bruce Bazant
Yes.
is here, Ted Breer, Bruce I understand is an apology,
Yes.
Michael Coffey,
Yes, present.
Michael Doherty,
Yes.
John Doherty I think's an apology, Robert Bierbacker,
Not all here.
you're always here, Rob, Alan Evans, Brian Fitt, I think we should take as an apology.
It is an apology, yes.
Yeah. Frank Henning
Yes.
is here. Margaret Henning is here. Detlef Hinkst.
Yes.
Reg Jackson, I think, is an apology. Graham.
Yes, that's true, yes.
I'm here. My wife will be here later, so I'll tick her off. Pat Kelly's an apology. He's cruising around Ireland and the UK at the moment. Joe Landsberg.
Yes.
Guy Landsberg. Peter McCartney.
Here.
John Metcalf.
Apology.
Graham Ratton.
Yes.
Bev Ratton.
Yes.
Laurie Rose.
Yes.
Kevin the Ryan.
Yeah.
Will Semler. I think we mark Will down as an apology.
Apology, yeah.
David Taylor. Les Sterling.
Yeah.
Keith Tupper,
Present.
and Livio Turecek.
Yeah.
We could just see any reports. Start with Kevin Ryan, our treasurer. Kev, like to update us on
Yep, we're
our financial position?
Yes, as of now, we have in our bank balance of $900, or $899.66 to be exact. Since we last met, we've paid the fee that we paid for South Pacific, and we've had a few more members pay, and there's just a handful still to come.
Okay, be good to get those in, and then we've got a full book to cover us for the year. Graham, would you like to report at all in relation to your Armina activities?
Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody.
It's not working, Graham. You stay close to me, I'll pick it up.
Okay. Two people I've spoken to who are not here today because of various medical problems. Reg Jackson had a fall and suffered some abrasions and scrapes and fairly minor injuries, but he was therefore, after that, unable to cope at home and with the injuries. So he is currently in respite at Kew Botanica over in off Cotham Road in Kew, having physiotherapy and recovering from his various minor injuries. Bert Berryman's not here because he's got a troublesome knee which is affecting his mobility. So we hope that he will get relief from that soon. They're the only people that I've been in touch with this month. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Just what's their key? Yep, just what's their cord? We don't want another fall. My great pleasure this morning to induct Margaret Henning as a member of this club. Margaret, would you like to come forward? Margaret, of course, is well known to us, being the wife of Frank, who's been a member for a very long time, and Margaret has attended our meetings quite regularly as a guest before we saw the light and opened the club up to lady members, and she pretty promptly joined up. So Margaret, it's a pleasure to formally welcome you and to admit you to the fellowship of the Probus Club of Heidelberg. As from now, you have full rights of membership of our club. It's a low-key organisation and we prefer to keep it that way, but our basic purpose is to provide a pleasant and interesting meeting place where acquaintance can be broadened and good fellowship can be enjoyed by compatible people. We want membership to continue to be attractive to people like yourself. So we really appreciate your joining our club. We look forward to your involvement with our club activities, including our membership meetings, and may I congratulate you and everyone. Give a warm round of applause to Margaret. Margaret, would you like to do a members' corner for us down the track?
Well, think about it.
Okay, think about it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, I'm delighted that Livio has agreed to do a members' corner for us this morning. He did send me through some background notes, which I must say I found fascinating. Livio has come a long way from Trieste, where the journey started, and arrived in Australia in 1952. 54, was it? Okay. At the age of about 13?
15.
15, right. and an early job he had was with a store in Melbourne, which was an absolute icon, and which is no longer with us, namely George's. And he might tell us a little bit about that. I think he was working in dispatch. Anyway, he came into contact with a young man who was studying medicine. And again, I think Livio will tell us a bit more about this, but as a result of that involvement with this young medical student, he decided that he would like to study medicine, which is what he did. Graduated and then worked in various hospitals, and then decided that he would like to specialise in the area of psychiatry. So then qualified as a psychiatrist and worked in a number of places, such as Griswold, which we're probably all familiar with, particularly working in drug and alcohol areas, and also towards the end of his career had an involvement with forensic psychiatry. So it's clearly been a very interesting journey from Trieste to where he is now, and I really look forward to hearing Livio tell us more about it. Would you like to make him welcome?
Well, thank you, David, for that introduction. Some people have always known what they wanted to do in life from an early age. A friend of mine always wanted to be a doctor, and eventually he became a physician, now a retired physician. In my case, I believe that a lot of the things that have happened in my life was actually due to chance and perhaps just good luck. You could say that it was blind luck that I was born in Trieste, rather than something like Russia or Ukraine. When I was growing up, Trieste was actually a free territory under Anglo-American administration. Trieste was a cosmopolitan city of about 200,000 people. The center of Trieste actually spoke Italian, and I went to an Italian school. But the periphery spoke a number of languages, including Slovenian and Croatian and even Hungarian. And Trieste was on the border of Slovenia. It's about 150 kilometers from north of Venice. The region was politically quite stable. And in fact, Trieste was quite prosperous because they had the Lloyd Triestino shipping company, and the Allied Forces Administration offered a number of employment possibilities. My grandmother actually was in Slovenia, and she was only 25 kilometers or less, 20 kilometers away from Trieste. But everything changed in 1954 when the British and the American pulled out of Trieste, and this caused considerable turmoil. And I remember riots in the street, and a number of people were killed. And father decided to emigrate. In fact, something like 10% of Trieste emigrated in the next 5 years. A lot of them came to Australia, and we came to Australia as assistant migrants. In those days, Robert Menzies was Prime Minister, and the population of Melbourne was, of Australia I should say, was only less than 10 million. And if you remember, the mantra at the time was populate or perish. Well, when we settled in Melbourne, I was almost 15 years of age, and a lot of people were sent to work. But my mother insisted that I should continue my education and learn English. So I went to a Catholic school, and because I was ahead in Trieste, slightly ahead, then I was able to help the kids with Latin and algebra, and that taught me English. In the 1950s, it was very easy to get a job in the school holidays, which I did. And at one stage, as David mentioned, I was working in George's of College Street in the dispatch department. I was actually packing glassware, which was very interesting work. But at the time, I did meet with a medical student who was also working there. His father was actually a tram driver, and we became friends. And I was taken because he was an interesting fellow to talk to about the medical course that he was doing. And I was curious and then fascinated by what he was telling me. Up to that point, I had vague thoughts about applying for architecture after my matriculation. But I'm mindful of Seneca, the Roman philosopher, that famously said that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. So it was that I fronted up to the medical selection committee, or whatever it was, a panel, and I was full of confidence, and I had a fair degree of youthful arrogance. I got admitted to the medical course. And in addition, I was awarded the Commonwealth Scholarship, which was implemented by Menzies at the time. How lucky was I to have free university at the time. So I did my internship, if you like, at St Vincent's Hospital, and then graduated, and then spent 2 years in St Vincent's. The first year I was just a junior resident medical officer, and the second year I was a senior medical officer. It was in the second year that I had a term in psychiatry, and that was interesting because psychiatry was changing at the time. In 1956, antipsychotic medications were developed, and then after that, antidepressant medication were developed. And there were changes in the electroconvulsive treatment that were used at the time. There were changes in the way that psychiatry was practiced in the mental hospitals, changing from custodial care to more like rehabilitation and active treatment. In St Vincent's, it was quite an innovation, and we were even using hallucinogenic substances like LSD or psilocybin as a treatment regime for resistant patients. But then I was at a crossroad. The crossroad was to do with what am I going to do after you leave, after I left St Vincent's Hospital. And I want to share with you a very famous poem by Robert Frost, the American poet. And the poem is called The Road Not Taken, which highlights the fact that it's very difficult at times to make a decision, and the decision in life tends to be quite irreversible. The road not taken. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry, I could not travel both. And being one traveller, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as far that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first one for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh. Somewhere, ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less travelled by, and that made all the difference. So I began my journey into psychiatry when I was appointed as the medical officer at Ballarat, and then I did 3 years as a medical officer in Royal Park Psychiatric Hospital. It was there that I met John Cade, Dr. Cade, who in 1948 returned from the prisoner of war experience, and he was quite a good teacher. And what's more, he was a trailblazer in psychiatry. In 48, he was in charge of several patients with manic psychosis, and he had the idea that lithium salts would be beneficial in their treatment. So he actually tried it on guinea pigs, and then he tried it on himself. And as he had no side effects, he then tried it on one of the manic patients, and he had tremendous success with them. And that actually started the pharmacological treatment of psychiatry in Melbourne. In fact, lithium therapy became the gold standard for manic depressive psychosis, which then became known as bipolar illness. So after my DPM, Diploma in Psychological Medicine at the University of Melbourne, I was appointed as psychiatrist at Parkville Psychiatric Unit. Parkville Psychiatric Unit was a centre of excellence at the time, and it was the brainchild of Professor Davies. Professor Davies was actually appointed in 1964 when I was still a medical student. And he was an interesting patient and an interesting professor, and he was interested in antidepressant medication. So I was involved in research of antidepressant medications in Parkville Psychiatric Unit, but at the same time, one of my consultants was also interested in sexual disorders. So I was involved in reviewing and assessing transsexual individuals that wanted to change. And at the same time, homosexuality was actually deemed to be a psychiatric illness by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, the DSM, from the American Psychiatric Association. And in fact, the second edition removed it from being an illness to a personality disorder, which was called ego-dystonic homosexuality, which just meant that the person's sexual orientation was cause of distress and they wanted to change. So we were involved in trying to make a difference to people wanting to change their homosexual orientation, which, as you would imagine, wasn't terribly successful. The term homosexuality was dropped altogether in subsequent edition of the DSM and was dropped altogether in 1987. After I left Parkville Psychiatric Unit, I was appointed as a consultant psychiatrist at Lorandal Hospital in Bandura. That was an interesting position because I would be in charge of 20 or 25 inpatients. We had our own charge nurse and dedicated nurses. We had occupational therapy. We even had music therapy at the time. And I was there for some 2 years. But then I was reminded by the Dalai Lama, who famously said that sometimes not getting what you want can be a stroke of luck. And what happened was that I applied for a position in Melbourne which I didn't get, but instead I was appointed as medical superintendent at Greswold Centre. Greswold Centre was a rehabilitation facility of about 100 people, 100 inpatients, and it had a very extensive occupational therapy. And the appointment was part of the Alcohol and Drug Dependent Services branch, which was formed in 1968. And part of that was attending Pleasant View Assessment Centre, and I was also conducting a outpatient session at Smith Street Clinic, dealing with some of the methadone clients. At the same time, I was also appointed as a consultant at Odyssey House. Odyssey House was an interesting facility. It was run by the McGrath Foundation. Walter McGrath was a philanthropist in Melbourne, and he bought a monastery which was on the bank of the Yarra in Plenty, and that became the main facility. The model, the rehabilitation model, was imported from New York and was a therapeutic community, self-run. I must say that working in alcohol and drug addiction as a consultant showed me a side of the city of Melbourne that I did not know existed, where drug addiction, homelessness, criminality and prostitution seemed to be a way of life. At about that time, I was also appointed as a sessional psychiatrist at Royal Melbourne Hospital, working alongside Professor Davis, which was interesting. At the same time, I was appointed in charge of the lithium clinic. Lithium at that time was experiencing a resurgence because lithium was becoming popular. It was shown to be not only effective in depressive conditions, but also effective in recurrent depression, and it was found to be effective in prophylaxis, that is, long-term treatment of lithium, preventing further relapses. And I was in charge of that clinic for some time until it was dissolved. But it was important to monitor lithium because it had a narrow therapeutic range and one could get toxic effects. And also long-term lithium gave renal and thyroid complications. It was then that I joined the Melbourne Clinic, which, Professor Davis was important in establishing the Melbourne Clinic in Richmond, and I was there when it was being constructed almost. I had my own inpatients that had been referred from general practitioners, and the Melbourne Clinic was still associated with the Melbourne University. So we were seeing medical students, and we had a weekly scientific session. So the collegial atmosphere in the clinic was really invaluable at the time. I was also appointed as a sessional psychiatrist at the Austin, doing liaison psychiatry, which deals with psychological issues in patients that were inpatients at the hospital. It's interesting work which often involves assessing patients' abnormal reaction to their illness or to trauma. But as I was getting older, I withdrew from inpatient treatment altogether. And then I did some work in forensic psychiatry, which is a subspecialty dealing with the interface between law and medicine. I was mainly involved in in civil cases rather than criminal cases. And I did a lot of work for work cover, really helping with the termination of return to work and determination of permanent disability and things like that. So in conclusion, I can say that I've had a fortunate life. Albert Facey, in his book called Fortunate Life, stated that it is really to do with finding joy in the simplest of things. I believe that it's also finding joy in the things that you do, and that was so in my case. But from time to time, I reflect on the poem by Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken. And I wonder, sometimes I wonder, what would it be like to actually have been an architect? Thank you for listening to my story.
We've got a couple of minutes. Any questions I'd like to ask? That was fascinating.
Thank you for the lovely presentation. Listening to talkback radio, which is dangerous at the best of times, there's lots of people who are abnormal in some way or another. There are lots of people wandering the streets of Melbourne who don't seem what we would consider normal. And in the old days, they locked them up in psychiatric hospitals and places like that. But that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Could I get your views on that?
Well, in the 1950s, it was like that. I think a lot of things have happened since then, and in particular, I mentioned in 1956, for example, we had the development of antipsychotic medication like Largactil or Stelazine, things like that. And then we had antidepressant medication like tricyclic antidepressants like triptanol, that sort of Doxepin, those sort of things. So it changed, but also the most important change was that the idea of permanent incarceration, if you like, is pathological. It's really abnormal to keep people like that. And there was a movement to free the hospitals and try to get people rehabilitated. And also we had new medications which help in that process. And there were changes in electroconvulsive treatment, which was becoming more effective and more common. So the combination was that there were less people in mental hospitals, and there was an attempt to have rehabilitation and to have treatment instead of custodial care.
Okay. Thanks, Livio. Terrific. Can we all show our appreciation for Livio? Di's going to introduce George.
Right, good morning everybody. You can hear me, can't you?
Yeah.
It's my pleasure to introduce George to us today. He comes from Belgium originally, arrived here in 1951.
George, go on the other side.
Then I can get off there. And he's been in Australia ever since, this lovely country, and he loves being in Australia now. George was originally a pharmacist, but when he was, 49? He decided that was rather boring. So he formed his own consultancy, and he consulted on medications given to people in hospitals and prisons mostly, and found that very much more interesting. And now, George is my bowling partner. Great pleasure that I ask him to tell us now about his family's doings.
Thank you, Diane. Thanks for the invitation. I found Livio's address very, very interesting because I worked in medication management and particularly in prisons where over 90% of all the population are on medications, particularly the medications that you spoke of in the early days, like Actil and Stelazine and Margaret, and then later on lithium. So I found that very, very interesting. Thank you. And it's also a small world because when I walked into the room, I was welcomed by Graham. And Graham delivered my two children, now aged 52 and 49. So a small world. So thank you for inviting me. 20 years ago when I was 60, I could have spoken to you with just a few flash notes, but at 80 I've got to use a libretto. So when Diana extended the invitation, she asked me to speak about my parents' remarkable lives. So I hope you find it of interest. My dad, Leo, was born on the 19th of December 1912 in Lodz, Poland, into a struggling Jewish family. Within a year of Dad's birth, his father died at age 31, leaving his mum, 26, a widow. She never remarried. She brought up two kids, two boys. She took in washing and mending. My mum was a single child, a sole daughter of a loveless marriage, also born into a struggling Jewish family, and her father deserted the family in the 20s and went to live in Belgium. So she was brought up as a single child with a single mum. Fortunately, both had large extended families, which helped, but life was still a struggle. Anti-Semitism in Poland had been endemic since the 20s. Hatred of Jews had been endemic. But in the early 20s, it became open and it made life very difficult. Jews were limited into the trades that they could be accepted into the professions, and universities had quotas. So the discrimination was state sanctioned. My dad was blessed with a photographic memory, and he matriculated near the top of his class, but going to university was not a possibility because of the quotas. So he took an apprenticeship and became a textile engineer. My mum, they didn't know each other at this stage, my mum worked as a secretary. In 1933, my dad joined the Polish Army as a reservist, and because of the state-sanctioned discrimination, it was almost unheard of for a Jewish person to obtain the rank of an officer. But Leo became a lieutenant in the Polish Army. So my mum and dad met in Lodz in 1936, they married in 1938, and they lived very modestly in a small flat together with their two mothers. Leo worked for a German textile mill, and Irene worked as a secretary. There'd been speculation of war for many months, and in early 1939, a directive came from the head office of the textile mill located in Saxony in Germany to close the mill, sell the stock, sell the machines, and sack the workers. So that was a very good indication that there would be an invasion by the Nazi Third Reich. Knowing the Reich's well-publicised Jew hatred and persecution in Germany, Leo's mum pleaded with Irene and Leo to leave and go to Russia to escape the oncoming invasion by the Reich. But Irene refused to leave because her mother refused to leave, and she said she wasn't going to have another. So they all stayed. On September the 18th, 1939, which was about a year after Mum and Dad had married, Hitler's army marched into Lodz. And that's where the nightmare began. Jews were progressively rounded up by the SS or the Gestapo or the Wehrmacht, and many Polish Catholics were enthusiastic in handing up Jews who they knew. In fact, it was a friendly neighbour who lived in the same block of flats as Mum and Dad who led the Gestapo to their door, and then he stole their possessions. They were given minutes to collect their things and pack, and they were herded into hell, the Lodz Ghetto. The Lodz Ghetto, I still get emotional. I've known this story all my life, and I still get emotional. The Lodz Ghetto was a slave labour camp established by the Nazis. It was an area of about 4 square kilometres, with 1.5 square kilometres habitable, into which approximately 160,000 Jews were herded. Now, to put that in perspective, I looked up, for the purpose of this talk, I looked up what the density was in one of the most crowded cities in the world, Mumbai. And they have 32,000 people per square kilometre, which is 48,000 per 1.5 kilometres, compared with 160,000. 160,000 people crowded into 1.5 kilometres. The inmates lived in appalling squalor. Most of the ghetto living areas had neither running water nor sewerage, and living conditions were cramped and filthy. All inmates were obliged to wear the yellow Star of David on their outer garments, and the ghetto was enclosed by wooden fences and barbed wire. In April of 1940, it was sealed off to the outside world. Guards patrolled the perimeter with Alsatian dogs, and anyone who approached the perimeter was shot. All able-bodied Jews were forced to work as labourers in horrendous conditions. Anyone who was not productive was sent to the gas chambers and the ovens on the daily cattle transports which left the ghetto. Over its 4.5-year existence, more than 250,000 Jews passed through the Lodz Ghetto. About 44,000 of these died of either malnutrition, starvation, or disease. And the survivors were progressively deported to extermination. Now remember, these were not POWs. These were innocent civilians who were there because of who they were. In his testimony written in 1980 for his grandchildren, my dad chronicled the events of his childhood and my mum's life together. And here is the opening paragraph that he wrote on the Lodz Ghetto. So these are my dad's words, not edited. The Lodz Ghetto was a monster creation of Hitler's clique, beyond my possibilities to describe, where every day hundreds died of various diseases, but mainly from hunger. There were over 100 factories in the ghetto, and every person over the age of 7 had to work. We worked at different jobs and always had to fight for our survival. We lived and subsisted in squalid, cramped conditions. Those inmates who were not productive or became ill were sent to the extermination camps. Hunger was our enemy and malnutrition was rife. Each day corpses were collected from the streets by specially assigned ghetto inmates and piled on horse-drawn carts. Winters were particularly difficult and harsh with no heating, and many corpses were found in the snow each morning. We lived by our wits, and with luck and just mere chance, Irene and I both survived. My mum worked in a factory making parts for munitions, and my dad, being a textile engineer, was in charge of a factory making cloth caps for the German armed forces. Dozens of people worked there. In his testimony, Leo related many stories about the ghetto. Some were too awful to repeat, some were inspiring, but I'll share 2 with you. The first is a story of heroism. The factory that Dad managed received cloth, linings, thread, templates and other items necessary to make the various caps, and inmates skilled in textiles worked in the factory. Leo decided that he could help save some of the elder inmates by giving them seemingly productive tasks, and he provided work for them in a very ingenious way. He set up quality control tables, seating several elderly inmates to check the stock coming in and check the caps going out. Their purpose was to closely inspect and measure the incoming materials and also inspect the caps in various stages of production, inspecting the stitching, the linings, the finished product, the packing. These elders sat and inspected, which greatly impressed the fastidious Germans. As the elders worked, they received their meagre rations and were able to survive a little bit longer. Leo's efforts were recognised by the ghetto hierarchy, and he was given a memento. He was given a memento which was manufactured and put together by a silversmith and a bootmaker using melted down Polish coins and shoe leather. We have this memento today, as I'm showing it to you, and it bears various symbols. Each means something significant, including pigs, which represent the beasts that ran the ghetto. But how did the memento survive? That brings me to a second story. Irene was a brave, fearless and feisty woman, and she remained so all of her life. Although the ghetto was sealed off, there were concealed breaks in the perimeter fencing. Food could be passed through those breaks at night from the outside by decent, brave Polish Catholic folk who risked their lives in doing so. Any Jew attempting to pass through the fence out of the ghetto, as I said, risked being shot on sight. One dark and stormy winter night, Irene reversed her overcoat so the Star of David was on the inside. She took the memento and 3 other small pieces that were sentimental, put them in a glass jar, and that included her wedding ring, and she put them in a glass jar with a screw lid. So that she took my grandfather's tie pin, my grandpa's wedding ring which he left at home when he deserted the family, and her wedding ring. I'll tell you about the dollar later. And she put those in a glass jar, and she breached the fence. She went to the outside world and walked very carefully to the block of flats where they had lived. In the coal cellar, which had an earthen floor, Irene buried the jar in one corner. This was both brave and foolhardy. But she achieved what she wanted. Something would be left in case they survived. Then she made her way back to the ghetto because the chance of surviving on the outside was nil. So in the summer of 44, the Americans entered Europe, and the Nazis, knowing they were losing the war, decided to liquidate the Lodge ghetto and destroy all the remains. So on the 13th of August 1944, 4.5 years after being incarcerated, my parents were herded onto the last cattle transport from the ghetto bound for the feeder concentration camps of the infamous Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp. Up to 150 humans were packed into each cattle truck, far exceeding the intended capacity for livestock. These crowded, sealed freight wagons had no food, no water, no sanitation for the journey which lasted several days. En route, the train, this led obviously to death. People died from dehydration, malnutrition, suffocation. En route, the train stopped and all surviving males were herded off the train. And my mum and dad said to each other that if they survived, they would meet again in Lodge. The train took the women to Ravensbrück concentration camp, and the men were forced marched to Sachsenhausen concentration camp and later on to Auschwitz. So this was June 1944. The inhumane conditions and the torture in the concentration camps is well documented, so I shan't go into that. Other than to say, each time I see photos, I still get upset. And every time I see a movie, I look for my dad. In late January 45, so that was June 44, June 44. In late January 45, Auschwitz was liberated by the Soviets, who also liberated Ravensbrück in the April. Both my parents were ill, emaciated and starved. My dad was infected with typhus and weighed 45 kilos. He and my mum had both suffered unspeakable things, but by miracle, they'd survived. My dad later said that 3 things contributed to their survival: luck, determination, and a tough childhood. So they each separately made their way back to Lodge. My mother arriving first, and Dad arriving much later because he'd been hospitalised for the typhus and the malnutrition. In Lodge, they found each other in the May, and they searched for relatives. None were found. Over 70 members of the family, aunties, uncles, cousins, grandparents had all been murdered. My mum and Dad went back to the block of flats where Mum had hidden the mementos, only to be turned back by the caretaker and the people living there, including the one who'd stolen their possessions. My dad had met up with a Catholic friend, Jan Karski, with whom he'd been at high school and also in the army. Together with Jan, Mum and Dad returned to the building. Jan held the residents at bay with his service pistol, while Mum retrieved the precious buried jar. You might want to take note of the name Jan Karski. Jan Karski was a real hero. He was an amazing human being. He ended up living in America, and he kept in touch with Mum and Dad, and in 1993 he came to Australia to visit them and stayed at their home. So there being no relatives remaining in Lodge and the anti-Semitism still being rife, Irene and Leo decided to go to Brussels to look for Irene's dad, who for some 20 years had been living in Brussels with a Flemish lady named Felicia Goosens. Upon arriving, Felicia told my parents that Jacob, her father, had also been murdered. Felicia was most helpful to my mum and dad. She gave them money, shelter, food, encouragement. She helped them learn the language. And I was born at the end of March 46 in Belgium. Because my parents were stateless, the Belgian government would not let them remain, and they would only let them remain until they found somewhere else to go. So they applied for the USA and they applied for Australia. And while waiting to be accepted somewhere without work permits, they worked for money under the table. My dad sewed zips into jackets, and my mother worked as a cleaner. In 1950, the Australian government opened its arms to us, thanks to Immigration Minister Arthur Caldwell and the Chifley Labor government. We arrived by a migrant ship. We left from Genoa, and we arrived at the ship was called the Sorrento. It was very basic, I still remember it. 6 people to a cabin, 2 bunks and 2 sleeping on the floor, but it was transport. So we arrived in June 51 to commence a free and fortunate new life in this wonderful and welcoming country. By then, the government was a Liberal government run by Robert Menzies. When we set foot in Fremantle, 2 things happened. I was given my first ice cream, which I still remember, and my parents declared they were now Australians. We sailed on to Melbourne, and with no English, almost no money, and no extended family, we were settled into a migrant refugee accommodation in Punt Road, South Yarra. Apart from smiles, the only support we received was a basket of fruit from the Good Neighbour Council and directions from Mum and Dad where they could go at night to learn English. My mum worked as a cleaner, my dad worked in a factory, and off I went to South Yarra Primary. Life was fantastic. We were healthy, well-fed and free. I'll share with you another paragraph from Leo's testimony to his grandkids. Leo wrote, and again verbatim, "It's hard for me to explain to you what freedom means to us. One must be born into freedom in order to take it for granted. We were not, and thus we've never taken it for granted, but we appreciated freedom so much when we received it here in Australia. I hope that you, your children and their children will always enjoy freedom and promote freedom to others." We eventually moved to a modest home in Murrumbina, where Mum and Dad started a small business, making ladies' leather handbags by hand, operating out of our lounge room. And off I went to Hughesdale State School. And on my first day, I'll never forget this, a big beefy kid knocked me over and sat on me and said, "You're going to barrack for Essendon." And I said, "What's barrack and what's Essendon?" The rest is history and I'm still suffering. So as soon as we could, we took Australian citizenship and my folks proudly displayed their naturalisation certificates in the lounge room. We were Australians. People have asked me how the deprivation, humiliation and torture affected Irene and Leo. And yes, there was torture, which I won't describe, and they underwent unspeakable things. There was no nightmarish screaming at night that I recall. There was no hatred. My parents hated no one. There was no bitterness. Something which did distinguish us from what I saw in my Aussie school friends' homes was that in our small kitchen, against one wall, on a low bench so as to keep them away from mice, there was a sack of flour, a sack of sugar, a sack of rice, a sack of salt, and a big Winchester bottle full of cooking oil. And in the shed, a large tin of kerosene. When one ran low, another took its place. And that habit lasted till the late 50s, early 60s, all except the kero, because by then we had gas heating. But their frugality with food lasted all their lives. They never forgot their hunger and deprivation. They never ever wasted food. In our backyard, we had 10 chooks in a chook run, and the yard was a veritable market garden, fertilised with chook poo and with horse poo from the baker and milkman's horses, which was my job to collect. Eventually that stopped because the baker and the milkman got motorised vehicles, so that let me off that task. Mum and Dad loved trees and plants, and they became fabulous gardeners. And in fact, that's a good segue for my dad's sense of humour. When my wife and I bought our first little cottage in 1973, it had a lovely cottage garden. And I said to my dad, "How do I tell the plants from the weeds?" And Leo said, "Oh, that's simple. You pull everything out, whatever grows back's a weed." Mum and Dad, as they got on their feet, they helped to shape that garden. It was a really lovely garden. As they got on their feet, they did many, many good deeds. They were people of strong but quiet leadership, and they stood firm where others may have faltered. Over the years, they helped many, many folk who were less fortunate. They weren't judgmental. They very rarely spoke badly of people. They had true friends and really deep friendships over a really wide range of ethnicities, socioeconomic, people from different socioeconomic areas, different professions, different trades. There were always people in our home. And when they led from the front. They never hid behind others when standing up for what they believed was right or against what they thought was blatantly wrong. I could give examples, but it would take too long. They believed that there are moral reasons to care, to act, and to change what is wrong, and to try to make it right. Thus they were never bystanders. I refer to them as upstanders. They stood up for what they believed was right. Irene and Leo each died at the age of 98, which was quite remarkable, and their legacy of survival being a son, me, 2 grandkids, and 5 great-grandchildren. When referring to the Holocaust, the term never again is often used. But could this happen again? As a boy growing up in post-war Australia, I never felt physically unsafe or discriminated against or hated as an Aussie Jew. That's not to say there wasn't bigotry or anti-Semitism here, but it was at a low level, at a veiled level, pretty much in-house and not common in everyday life. You didn't see it in the streets. Sure, Jews were quietly not permitted to join some golf clubs or attend some private schools or join the Melbourne Club, but Jews weren't the only people treated that way. It was common in the 50s to see job ads say Catholics need not apply. First Nations people weren't allowed to vote. Asian people were excluded because of the white Australian policy. It was an endemic underlying discrimination, but it wasn't proactive and out there. So these blatant examples of ignorance and prejudice became completely unacceptable over time, and rightly so. Today it's illegal to discriminate in these ways, but that doesn't mean that prejudice disappears. Today many Australian Jews feel suspected, hated and even threatened. Not by quite veiled prejudice, but by active, hateful, open racism. And we feel it from multiple directions. From the far right, from the radical Islamists, from some supposedly progressive people, and political parties on the very far left. The last two, the radical Islamists and the progressives, as they're called, I call them reactives, but they're called progressives. They're the elephant in the room. Really, the far right's an easy target. Everyone hates the Nazis. But the Islamists and the far left are the elephant in the room and rarely referred to in the press. If you've ever read Michael Gwenda, who was the editor of The Age and now occasionally writes for The Australian, he amplifies this. So sometimes these attitudes are expressed with shunning or abuse, or at their worst, they're expressed with violence and even murder. Here are some examples why today we feel threatened. Fire bombings and desecration of places of worship and business. The shocking Bondi attack. The ongoing need for armed guards at Jewish aged care facilities, schools and Jewish events. While there are no armed guards at Christian schools or Hindu schools or Muslim facilities or events, armed guards are now present at every Jewish organisation and event. Just think on that for a moment. Why should that be necessary? Why is it so? For many years I was a director of a not-for-profit Jewish aged care facility. We recently designed and built a new 5-storey building. The AFP, the Australian Federal Police, advised us to put bomb-proof glass in the first 2 stories facing the main street. This is an aged care facility. There's today open harassment in the streets and public places. Jews wearing a kippah or a Star of David necklace, or the ultra-Orthodox Jews in their traditional garb, face the risk of being screamed at or worse in the Melbourne CBD, particularly on weekends. Last year our grandson, 13, was on a school excursion at the Melbourne Museum with his school, Mount Scopus College. There happened to be a group from another school, an Islamic college, which I won't name, who were there on the same day. The vitriol from these boys was shocking. And when Scopus wrote to that college, they never received an answer. Jewish students at uni are openly harassed on campus. My 20-year-old grandson, studying at Monash University, now prefers to take as many lectures as he can online, so he doesn't have to walk through those protests. He doesn't step back. He he's like my mother. He's a boxer. He's a very good footballer. He's a big boy, and he doesn't step back, but he prefers to now take as many lectures as he can online. Jewish performers and artists and academics have been doxxed and vilified and subject to online abuse. In fact, the internet is so full of hateful vitriol that my daughter, who's an author, has removed herself from all social media. And so it goes. This new hatred is focused clearly and exclusively towards Jewish Australians, making this the most difficult time for us since Jews arrived here with the First Fleet. Both my parents and their generation, and indeed mine, thought of Australian life and Jewish life as being a perfect cultural fit. And after the Holocaust, there was nothing to fear in Australia. Never again was the mantra. So how has it come to this? The Jews are facing the greatest threat ever in Australia. The proactive bigotry has emerged from the sewers, from what I call the sewers of hate. Richard Lancaster, the senior counsel assisting the Anti-Semitism Royal Committee, last week questioned how anti-Semitism could still exist following the Holocaust and the lessons learned from that tragic moment in history. He said anti-Semitism was not a belief. He called it a virus, and he said, like a virus, it mutates. Right now, we're living in a world where outrage and extremism are the currency on social media, and it's fueling an epidemic of hate. And where certain public figures and far-left politicians and so-called influencers stoke division for their own ends. The current cultural conversation rejects nuance, it rejects thoughtfulness, it rejects curiosity, and it rejects tolerance. Instead, the default is tribalism and aggression. In this climate, old hatreds, many of which are important, are encouraged to blossom. And as a Jewish person, this is not just theoretical. Those comments, that hatred, that aggression, are real, and it's frightening. Because not long ago, our own neighbours turned upon us. It could happen in any other country, and we can't help feeling that it could happen to us here. We need to change the conversation, to remember the humanity of others, of people like my parents, like my family. I'm currently reading a book, I've almost finished it, called Max by Alex Miller. It was written in 2020. It's a non-fiction book about a bloke called Max Blatt, who immigrated to Australia after the war. And I came across this passage, and I wrote it out because I was speaking today. It reads, "The causes of that brief 12-year horror of Nazi rule are still being debated today, and hopefully questions will continue to be asked. The Holocaust has required us to rethink history and humanity. And when we stop asking the unanswerable question, why, and when we stop informing ourselves of this period, then no doubt history will repeat itself as it seems fated to do." End of quote. The fear today is that the coming generations may not care. But do we still have the capacity to identify and resist anti-Semitism? I believe that in Australia we do. Hopefully it's not too late, but society leaders must be the first to lead the way. And at present, there seems to be more silence than sincerity from many leaders. Although having said that, it was heartening to see how many prominent figures came out and encouraged Prime Minister Albanese to call a royal commission into the tragedy at Bondi. So how do we identify and resist anti-Semitism in Australia? To me, the key things are being aware of what's happening around us, educating our youngsters on the scourge of hatred, and being upstanders instead of bystanders when we hear or see hatred rear its ugly head. We have to reboot our antennae and be alert to this creeping viral infectious hatred. Hatred which can be so easily directed in other directions. to people of colour, of different ethnicity, to disabled people, to people of diverse sexual preference, or of differing religious beliefs. And really, anti-Semitism is the canary in the coal mine. So I'm going to leave you with two quotes. The first is from Pastor Martin Niemöller, a Lutheran pastor in mid-20th century Germany who died in 1984. Niemöller was a complicated figure. He was initially an anti-Semitic Nazi supporter, but his views changed after he was imprisoned in a concentration camp for speaking out against Nazi control of churches. In fact, Niemöller was in the same concentration camp as Leo, Sachsenhausen. He was there between 38 and 45, although Leo said, to his best knowledge, he never came across Niemöller. So Niemöller said of the Nazis, first they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for people with physical and mental disabilities, and I did not speak out because I was not one of them. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. The second quote is from the 18th century Irish-born statesman Edmund Burke, who said, "The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Thank you. If anyone has anything they want to ask me, I'm happy to answer. Oh, I'll tell you about the dollar. My mother had sewn into the hem of her coat, both in the Lodge Ghetto and in Ravensbrück, an American dollar. An American dollar could buy food for a family for a week. So that was one of the things this wasn't in the glass jar. In the glass jar was the memento acknowledging my father's heroism, my grandpa's wedding ring, which he left at home when he deserted the family, my mum's wedding ring, and my grandpa's tie pin. That was, the dollar was in mum's coat until she was liberated.
Any, yes.
Thank you for the talk. What was the attitude of the Soviets when they took over the camps, etc.?
That's a terrific question. The Soviet soldiers were mainly kids. They were 17, 18, 19-year-olds who were at the front. And a lot of them were farm boys. And my dad says that the first thing that they did when they found him, he was, as I described, a mess. They shoved a bottle of vodka in front of him. So they were being friendly. Being Polish, he understood some Russian. Being Russian, they understood some Polish. So there was no hatred, or there didn't appear to be any hatred, but it's a terrific question because within the Soviet Union, of course, there was. But not through mum and dad's experience. My uncle, dad's brother, who was a few years older, he fled Lodge to Russia, and he fought with the Russian partisans in the forests. And I don't remember him ever saying there was a problem.
And what about the Americans when they liberated the camps?
Both of the camps that my parents were in were liberated by the Soviets. The Americans liberated Dachau, and that's pretty well documented. They, I can't remember the general's name, I should remember his name. He made everyone parade past what the Germans had done, and he brought in people who lived in the surrounding area who said they didn't know what was going on, and he made them parade through the killing grounds. So I don't know what their attitude was, but it certainly seemed to be positive. But as I say, look, all that, my mum and dad never ever said a disparaging word about any ethnicity, nationality. They had German friends. So, you know, how did, as the book says, it's an unanswerable question. Why did it happen? And we've got to keep asking that question.
Yeah, it's a very timely presentation we had from George this morning. And if you haven't been doing it, I strongly recommend, when you have a moment, Google the Royal Commission, and you'll be able to watch the evidence being given before the Royal Commission. It's only been reported to a limited extent, but it is devastating to sit there and hear the stories of people in Australia in terms of what's happening. And I signed the petition to have a Royal Commission, and if ever I made the right decision, it was that one. But if you get the chance, just Google the Royal Commission, and it's been streamed live. It'll be streamed all this week, and there'll be another session in a few months' time. You mentioned Dachau. Yeah, we were in Munich and we visited Dachau. Dachau was the first concentration camp built just on the outskirts of Munich, and was originally for people who were the Nazis regarded as problems, mentally ill or whatever, religious who opposed them, etc. And then it led to Jewish people being confined there. And it was interesting, it's been set up in a way that they want not just foreigners, but German people to come and see what it's like, because it's very much, everything that was there, including the ovens and everything else, is all there that you can see. So it's a stark reminder that this is what happened. And talking to the people who ran it, they said they have regular tours from German schools going through Dachau.
It's wise.
Yeah.
Can I just tell you, just on Bondi, our eldest grandson Sam, the one who's at uni, was on his uni break, and he went to stay with some mates in Bondi. They were going to go to the candle lighting. They went fishing. We got a phone call from Sam out on the boat. They're always on their phones. He said, "Papa, I'm okay." I said, "What do you mean you're okay?" He said, "Don't you know?" I said, "No." He said, "Turn on the television." We had no idea what was happening, and so thank goodness Sam and his mates went fishing and didn't go to the candle lighting, but he was back the following day, and he's a tough kid, but he was traumatised. And the first thing he said to me when he got back, he said, "Papa, why do they hate us? They don't even know us."
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You can unmic me. Thank you, David.
Just in your pocket. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Great to have a good roll up today, and next meeting we hope to have the guy who was going to come along in April, Noel Clement, and he's going to speak to us primarily about the SES, the Special Emergency Services. And I think Laurie's here, isn't he? Laurie, can I confirm that you'll do a members' corner for us?
Next week.
Yeah, next week in June. Yeah, that'd be great. So Laurie Rose is going to do a members' corner for us in June, and again, I'd just like to thank Livio for putting his hand up to be prepared to do this morning's corner, which was very informative, covered a lot of very interesting areas. So it's, all in all, it's been a morning of reflection and plenty for us to think about. So we should have drinks and lunch soon. Look forward to seeing you next month. All the best.